Hello, everyone. Welcome to another week of Mantra and Magic, a podcast of Eastern philosophy meeting Western magical practice. And this week is a super special week for me because I'm here with one of my teachers, Gede Parma, also known as Fio, who's a Balinese Australian witch, international teacher, magical mentor, author, and initiate in some really cool witchcraft traditions, the Wildwood tradition and Reclaiming and Anderson Fairy. And he has authored and co-authored 5 books, all of which are on my bookshelf because I love them and I reference them so much, and so should you. And I'll put some links to the books themselves in a bio. And you might know Fio if you were into sorcery and folklore and getting into ancestor work and in touch with the land and ecstatic witchcraft and so many other beautiful things that he's shared with me and with the world, and really celebrating the craft, singing, dancing, and of course, laughing with friends. He lives in Australia and he has his own podcast, the Antipodean podcast, with the lovely fellow witch, Brodian. So also we'll post in the show notes about that, so you can go check him out there. Welcome, Fio.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Good to have you. First things first, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to share with the audience that we have and to offer some of your time and your energy and your love of all things that are magic and esoteric with us here. And if you could, I know you've got a lifetime's worth of different types of crafts and magical traditions, but if you could give everyone just a brief kind of intro into your lineage and to what you're teaching right now.
Yeah, okay. I've actually been reflecting on lineage a lot lately because I think it's both a really, like a lot of people, especially in the Western occult traditions, I think look at it in this really Freemasonic way. And there's a lot of like legitimization based on the correct rites and the correct procedures, maybe even with the correct gender roles. And often that fits into this really strange binary system that has a lot of Victorian thinking in it, which isn't really reflective of Indigenous thinking or of postmodern thinking. So there's a lot of challenge there. Also lineage, we all have lineage, right? A lot of people, I think, forget that, you know, we have ancestral lineage and that connects us to not just backwards and forwards in time, but it connects us in a spiral pattern through the infinite. And we inherit lineages all the time, depending on what philosophies we are ascribing to. Like there are philosophical lineages, there are dance lineages. Like when I was studying contemporary dance at school, like a lot of our teachers would talk about what lineages we were drawing from. There are dietary lineages, there are astrological lineages. Like so it depends on what the influences of one's teacher, like the influences and inspirations of our teachers and what they distill and pass on. In witchcraft, we talk about lineage a lot in initiatory traditions because we're talking about this intimacy between witch to witch to witch to witch. Ultimately, I always like to make sure that people understand that witchcraft is simply a thing that happens. So, like a lot of people are born predisposed to being able to perceive spirits, to have an experience of the inner world, the other world, in a really intense, uncanny way. And in a sustained way, to be able to get the attention of spirits and to be able to weave with what we call fate. And so all of that together, folklorically and across cultures and across history, has birthed this character, this reality, this constellation of the witch. And today, and probably since like the late 1900s and certainly into the 1950s when Gerald Gardner revived or reformed or whatever he did, no one really knows, in the 1950s in Britain with Western kind of British witchcraft. Around that time, there was also Rosalie Norton in Australia, who was a famous artist, and infamous artist, in fact. There's actually a documentary that was just released about her. And there was also Victor Anderson and Cora Anderson, who were working in the 1940s in Oregon. So I look at those three in particular, because of the three different continents, as evidence that around the 1940s and 50s, there was this like certainly there was already folkloric witchcraft, but there was this like renaissance, or like a catalyst, an etheric catalyst that was trying to, after the war, World War II, create this, maybe a doorway, a portal to the revival of goddess worship in the West, to the revival of animism in the West. Lots of things that since the Industrial Revolution, the West had lost or had been stolen or taken, depending on how you look from it. And so the witchcraft revival gave back a way for women to be powerful and exalted in traditions and religions. It gave back a way for us to have direct, intimate experience with magic and spirits in an empowering way. And it also gave us a way to look at history through a different lens, so that we could be critical, and through that critique, as a magical inquiry, call back and summon forth our lineages. And so, there are all these lineages now. I belong to a few, but I was also born into a magical lineage of Balinese spirit workers. I wouldn't call that witchcraft. Certainly, sometimes people call my grandmother, especially my father's mother, a witch. But that again is a Western word and it has Western history. But yeah, so I come from a group of people who perceive spirits can travel into the other world at will, can work with the fibers of fate. So there's a parallel there, and that was there from the beginning. And I think that, well, I know that gave me a huge head start when it comes to these things.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, like would the term that you would use in Bali for your grandmother, for you even, be closer to maybe like what we Westerners understand as shamanism? Like, would it be?
Yeah, this is so complicated, because the word witch probably meant something closer to what we now think of as a shaman. So like that word has such an ancient history, the word witch. And the word shaman has a more, like, it's an ancient word, but it's more modern in terms of how it translates across into academia, because it was through academia that it came into the West.
Right, because the Sami people had it, and then
like that group of Evenk-speaking Tungus people, which the Sami come from, yes. And so like that Siberian world of mediation with the spirits. But again, like I think this idea that shamans are only doing certain types of magic is really reductive, because when scholars and cultural anthropologists actually have looked at this, they see a variety of magical actions. Right. So again, like a shaman in Siberia is able to curse as much as they are able to heal. And again, we reflect that over to European witchcraft, and we see the same thing. And we see that gives traction to that old saying, a witch who cannot hex cannot heal. It also turns up as a witch who cannot curse cannot cure, and a witch who cannot blast cannot bless. And so there's an understanding that a witch or a spirit worker or a shaman is so aware of all the ways of moving energy. And in the same way that a doctor, like a medical doctor today, knows how to kill you with drugs and with surgery, that technical training actually helps them heal.
So they avoid it.
So they avoid the hexing. It. And they also know like what does what, right? Yes. And then occasionally there is that important justice curse that a group of witches can do in the name of the rest of nature upon those who are abusing nature, humans usually.
Always. I rarely see nature abusing itself. I think I've seen like an angry chimpanzee on a documentary once, but that's about it. Still in the primate family.
Yeah, we primates are interesting creatures.
Are. I'm also curious too, within that space, because with the Eastern philosophy, we get a lot of the ideas, whether it's Buddhism or yoga or whatnot, of karma and of what you put out is what comes back. And then I've heard that in witchcraft too, of like, it's going to come back threefold, it's going to come back tenfold with that different teachers. When someone does do an intentional curse or an intentional hex, are they embracing those repercussions in your experience, or are they preventing them with some other magical means?
So again, very complex.
Yeah.
So when I teach people in the craft, I teach cursing. I say, you don't have to use this, but I want you to know it, and I want you to understand the history of it.
Yeah.
It's so prevalent and it's so important, and it's so technical. It's so technical. So the threefold law is an interesting thing because it actually, the way it entered eclectic witchcraft. So like I could talk at length about all of that, but I'm going to try to get really punchy here. So in Gardnerian Wicca, which is an initiatory oath-bound tradition, there is, I've heard, because I'm not in it, from my friends who are Gardnerian, they say there is a teaching in the second degree initiation, which has been warped.
Okay.
Basically, what that teaching indicates is that when you have something good done to you, you are now obliged to do good 3 times back. When something bad has happened to you, you are now obliged to wield that 3 times back.
Oh, wow.
You know, so something like that. So the threefold law, as it has entered into kind of what we would now call eclectic Wicca or witchcraft, that isn't lineaged. You know, that where there aren't teachers, there are just books. And spirits. That's another important thing.
Yes.
Like if you figure that out, if you figure out how to do that, you're going to get teachers. That's kind of a bit warped. So this idea that strangely only a magical action is going to incur this threefold, and I've heard tenfold. I'm not so sure where that came from. That could be Kabbalistic.
That's again, what it sounds like to me, for sure.
Exactly, like, the 10 Sephirot and all of that. But what I know to be true is this, like the deepest ethic that I have as a witch is only this, which is total freedom is total responsibility.
Yes.
And so if and when a context arises where I feel that I, as a carrier of fate, which is an older understanding of witch, that I must, with my spirits and my allies, work a certain way. And again, I don't come from a dualistic cosmology where there's good and evil. There's only responsibility and sovereignty.
Yes.
And there's also like, what is just here? What is in right relationship is often how we speak. And so it's like, if I see something that is so fucked up and malicious and malevolent and is incurring like so much harm, then I must abate the harm. I must do something to draw a line. And sometimes that's what a curse is. We draw a line and we say, we communicate to all the parties really intensely. We say, here's the line. If you cross the line, this, and this will happen to you. Like there are consequences.
Yeah.
If you stop crossing the line and fix yourself, the curse will stop. So that's how I teach cursing. There's this finesse in there. There's this like, we want you to know that if you do these things, there will be consequences, and we invoke the full power of the natural consequences. So often in curses, witches and spirit workers will be invoking the underworld gods because they carry the laws of natural consequence and fate. And so if you look through old Roman texts and old Greek texts, you'll find the same thing, swearing on the gods of the underworld, because they hold that power.
Yeah.
Persephone is the mother of the Furies, things like that. So you know, and I have a really close relationship with her, so I often invoke her and them when doing that work. But when people think of cursing, I think they think of like witches doing petty curses on people who parked in their driveways. I'm like, no, I know hundreds of witches, and no, it's
just like, that's a waste of time, right?
Exactly.
It's a waste of energy and a waste of space to
and it's not,
worry
it's
about
not a great cultivation of magical virtue.
No.
And you know, so like if we're trying to cultivate and consolidate magical virtue, so we're effective sorcerers and spirit workers, we want to only do what feels absolutely right to our 3 souls, which is a whole other cosmology that some people may not have come across. But if my animal soul, my fetch, is against a working, then that's when it will wrap back into me. So if there's a part of my soul complex that is actually against the working, so that's why alignment and purification is so important, then I will curse myself. So I have to be, what in Anderson Fairy we say Kala. I have to be Kala before I do anything, including healing. Otherwise, it will ricochet, and that's the difference. So we have, most witches will have really intense purification and alignment practices.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the teachings that has stood with me from the moment that I met you, was the triple soul alignment. And finding different forms of it in different practices, right? Like in yoga, we talk about the 3 spaces as well. And that comes through in a lot of different ways. And I think it helps so much when people are having difficulty navigating like what is true, what is not, because when all 3 souls are in alignment, there is no question of what truth is, because they're all going towards the same will. And then the power is so much more effective. And I love the way that you've described curses for that, because a lot of people do, like when they're like, oh, you're a witch? Are you going to curse me? Do you want me to?
Well, this is the thing, right? Like, I like to exalt the witch, and the witch is more than this thing that she's been made out to be in recent decades, which is, oh, we're harmless and we don't do. I'm like, we're like beasts. We come out of caves and the centers of stars. We are ancient spirit workers, and actually we do wield incredible power, but the witch is often taught. I know a lot of people of so many traditions. I've worked in interfaith, I've worked with Catholic priests and imams and rabbis and Hindu priests and Buddhist monks, and there is amazing ethical work everywhere. What I have always noticed is that among witches, there is this, and witches can be as stupid as the next person, but generally speaking, among witches, there is a deeper inquiry into ethics. Like, people really think about it and reflect upon it and constantly discuss it, because we know that there is no, well, I practice a cosmology and a tradition that says there is no savior coming to save me. And so I love that, because it's very liberating.
Yeah, it is. And it puts you into your sovereignty too.
Exactly.
Because the second that no one's coming to save you and it's all your responsibility, like whatever you've been experiencing is exactly what you've created, then it makes you step up in a different way, because now from this point forward, there is no rescue coming. It's only you. And so then we become the ones we've been waiting for.
Exactly. And with that, like, I agree with that completely. And there's also the power of asking for help, right? And I think the other thing is that witches also know that. We know that we are interdependent, and we're woven into the web. And so we also know how to invoke and how to ask for help. And that could just be asking our dear beloved friends or someone on the street. And I think also because of that, we are trained to become helpers. Like when we are asked, we are almost trained to be prepared to be the ones who are asked for help. And that is a thing that witches have been doing for a long time.
Yeah, I had someone ask me once, like, oh, but you don't do healing, right? I was like, do I? Is this not healing? Is this work? Like, and I had to really sit with it. And I realized for years I had not been taking on the word of like healer or helper. And part of that for me was an internal resistance to the responsibility that comes with that work. And part of that was an internal resistance to doing it for someone. I didn't want to heal them. I wanted them to heal themselves. And the second that I could embrace that, the second that I realized, oh, I'm giving them the knowledge, the tools, and the how-to, then I can facilitate that process. And then suddenly I stepped into the word healer, and then I fought for it. Like, no, that's what witches do. We empower. What's more healing than stepping into that place of balancing your power with yourself and all the actions that you're taking? And
I agree. I think primarily witchcraft is a shamanistic healing tradition, or a constellation of traditions, and that sometimes we wield a curse as part of our healing, because we look a long way down the track. right? We're not just like, what's happening right now? We're like, oh, that's not great. That whole situation over there with the deforestation of this whole entire land, that's probably not great. So thinking down the track 20 years or 100 years, what is an important action now, right?
Yeah.
Probably I need to bind that situation.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, I will say that the bindings that I have done, which falls under the umbrella of like blasting curse work, like, they have always been so important to me and ultimately the people I have bound.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to think
Would you
upon.
classify banishment in that group too?
It feels like it's drawing from the same place. So when I do, like, sometimes we talk about right-handed magic and left-handed magic, but I make sure that, like, I want people to remember that there's a third road always. So I often talk about the head full of fire, the heart full of honey, and that the two hands come from those places. And so when my head is full of divine fire and my heart is full of the honey of the goddess, then the hands can do the work. So yes, I do think that I do think banishing is in the left hand. So the left hand we would associate with drawing a line, limiting, contraction, stopping, stemming. And the right hand we would associate with opening the way, soothing, expansion. And again, these themes come up in so many traditions, both those from Hindu and Buddhist tradition and Kabbalistic, Golden Dawn style ceremonial magic, and yes, witchcraft as well. And also there's interesting traditions that develop in the place where East meets West,
Yes.
which is the Mediterranean and the Middle Eastern traditions. There's a whole range of other shit going on in that area. And interestingly, I think we draw on that, you know, I think in witchcraft, and I know that in a lot of like ceremonial magical traditions, there's always a reference to the Middle East. There's always references going back to the Levant or to lands of the Jewish people or to Arabic lands. And
Egyptian too.
And Egyptian, exactly. Yeah. And Egypt is such an interesting, I was actually just reading about controversies around Egypt last night.
Oh, really?
But Egypt is such an interesting place historically and geographically, because it does have some of the most ancient, or it did, and I'm sure they're still present, but you know, it had such ancient forms of formal magic, like high magic, and that was influenced Greek magic and Roman magic and Celtic magic and Spanish magic, and because of the trading and because of how noble and exalted different cultures thought they were. Right? Yeah.
I want to go back and curse whoever set fire to Alexandria.
Yeah, that's a really intense part of history that, there were also, Alexandria is a famous example, but there were other libraries that were also, because there was a period, as you know, in the 2nd to 4th century of the Common Era where the formal conversion happened, and they banned pagan practices, and like they didn't use the word witch then, but they said that if you were caught doing a pagan offering or a pagan sacrifice or a pagan ritual, you would be killed. And they went around burning and smashing the temples. So when people these days see classical statues with arms missing and heads missing, that was fundamentalist Christians. So
my other lineage.
Yeah. Oh, intense.
Yes, that's something I spent like a lot of time and devotion to when I started working with you and when I started working with plant medicines, and where it really gets into ancestral work and that deep kind of ancestral work. And when I was considering having my own descendants and like to not or to, and when I decided to, it's like, okay, I really got to do this work so that I can hopefully stop the karma train from chugging along with them. And to have a set of ancestors who are native to the lands of Mexico, mostly to the north, like the northern desert regions, combined with the Spanish who came in and raped them. And then those Spanish are the progeny of the native peoples of Europe and the Gauls and all of them being raped by the Romans, who are it's just like, and it keeps continuing backwards. And in both that lineage and in my mother's side, to have the British and the Irish who hated each other, and then the Anglo-Saxon that's deeper, and the Picts and all of the other ones that are entwined in that Celtic lineage, who also were raped by the Romans and have that go backwards. And to have both of them have this severe form of Christianity stamp out all of their indigenous ways and their magical knowledge and transform it into only working with a very specific set of deities, because I think saints ought to count. I think so many of them really do hold that energy. It's been really interesting because every time I do ancestral work, they all hate each other. So I'm like, okay, guys, can we get along enough that we can talk about this? And I feel like getting into some of those spaces, they're wishing and they're hoping and they're praying that someone doesn't have to go through the same sort of, you don't matter and neither do your beliefs, and here you have to believe what we do and you have to become like us. That would end eventually. I can let them know and say, hey, we're starting to remember. We're starting to remember what you had to hide, what you had to leave behind, what you had to deny, what you had to watch get burned. And now the healing gets to start actually happening for the next few generations. And it makes me curious too, like, if we are these time spinners and edge walkers and between the worlds and able to reach forwards and back, how much we actually are changing in the past when we're doing the work we're doing nowadays. Is that?
I think that's true on multiple levels. Like, I definitely have had very intense mystical experiences where I have experienced myself in times that we would have now said before now,
Yes.
whatever that means. And I had experienced utterly, like, and I will, like, that's why I like witchcraft, because we talk about experiencing.
Yes.
I experienced tinkering and changing according to my triple will, right?
Mm-hmm.
According to what the great ones have asked of me. And again, I feel like witches, we're always working in consultation.
Yeah.
We're never just doing things alone, actually, which is fundamentally quite interesting. And I too relate to what I think we all relate. I think, you saying everything you just said is very important, because the reality is that another way I look at witchcraft is that it's that witchcraft is about it's about resistance to empire, and empire is a very particular kind of force. Like, it's a monolithic force, and it wants to destroy diversity, and which we need. Like, biodiversity is strength, right? It wants to, like, empire comes from emperor, which is imperator, which is command. So, like, it wants to command, and it wants to annex, and it wants to dominate. And certainly, like, I live in a country now that is under the British Crown. And, so in 1788, 11 ships, we're all taught this in Australia, 11 ships, which is factually true, but 11 ships came, and it was called the First Fleet, and they came from the Isle of Wight. And they brought, a lot of convicts, some people who probably had committed murder, but most of them had stolen bread for their poor families. Because why? Yeah. Because of the empire of Britain. Because whenever you have empire, you immediately have oligarchs. You have these elite few who control everything and amass the wealth and steal it from the labor of the 99%, right? And who pass on religions and philosophies that will instill that shame. So, so that people exist in contracted shame consciousness.
Yeah, which shame is the magic killer. So it helps them maintain their dominance.
Exactly. And also will sometimes, be like, oh, let's get them all drunk. Like in the early colonies in Australia, they would be like, well, what can we do to make sure that the convicts are not going to rise up and kill us? I know, we'll get them addicted to booze. So what are we going to feed them? We're going to feed them really poor nutritional rations, and we're going to give them a lot of beer or ale. Yeah. And then, of course, they teach them that because their skin is lighter than the indigenous people of all of the countries that make up so-called Australia, because there's so many sovereign nations in this continent, they say these people are primitive, they're barbaric, they're not even human, they, you know, blah, blah, blah. And they're not Christian, you know, they're pagans, they're heathens, and you can kill them. And they did. And, you know, and some of the convicts didn't. That was a few and far between kind of situation. So I definitely dissent from people who participated in removing, and we say that, but murder, in like systematic genocide.
Yeah.
And so I incur what is called ancestral debt, but I don't walk around going, oh, woe is me, whip me, whip me. Like, that's not how I've been taught to be by the elders of the indigenous nations. Like, I have initiates who are Aboriginal, you know, in my lineage, and I listen. I pay so much as someone who gets to live here, because I feel so lucky to be here. And I wasn't born here in Australia. I was born in Bali. So again, there's a different feeling for me, but I feel so lucky and fortunate to hear the wisdom of Indigenous elders in this country, and to hear their holy rage, because their rage is powerful and dynamic and righteous, and to feel into the ancient dreaming of these countries that I've gotten to experience myself in, and to remember that reparations and justice is important. And and that time, we were just talking about the multidimensionality of time.
Yeah.
I can be responsible for how I exist here. And that does actually heal my lineage, you know? So
Yeah.
I only have the capacity to heal my lineage. Like what you were talking about before, about not wanting to say that you're healing someone. I can't go around healing like this idea that I, as someone who descends from colonizers and convicts, have like, oh, I'm going to be the, you know, quote unquote white savior, not that I'm white, but that kind of paradigm. And I'm going to heal the poor, disenfranchised indigenous people. That's bullshit. They're mighty. You know, they've survived all of this bullshit, and they are still surviving and being artistic and powerful. And they have their own governing structures and kinship structures that are proliferating, and they're mighty. And I learned from that. I can only heal my lineage. And so I take my insights and give it back to mine. And that does unravel bullshit that is in the land. You know, that does do it. I can feel it. I know that is true. I know that I descend from people who've colonized this place. And because of that, I do walk through this world more easily. You know, and I see the evidence as I walk around of how easy I feel in this land, as opposed to people who have lived in it for hundreds of thousands of years. And that's a huge distinction. I notice that too when I'm in Turtle Island or North America, when I walk around, and because I've been confused to be native to that continent many times when I'm there, I'm always like, no. But I see the difference. And I have a dear friend, Abel, who I'm sure you've met, who, you know, his PhD is in Indigenous spirituality, religion, and culture. And he has exposed me to a wealth of like scholarly, intelligent, emotional, Indigenous academics and thinkers in Turtle Island who are about liberation and justice. And I notice the same movements are there. And they're so powerful because of how they choose to do liberation and justice. They don't do this punitive punishment thing that the British imperialist culture does, which we have inherited in the USA and Australia. They don't want to put people in prisons. They don't want to kill them with the death penalty. They want communal, collective accountability.
Yeah.
And that's harder.
And it's like, I think that's something that goes back to what you were saying earlier with witches and ethics, where these movements, these ways of moving through the world, and animism, I guess you could say, just like knowing that everything has life, everything has force, everything has some sort of sentience or consciousness,
And
whether
dignity.
we understand it. And power. We recognize that to punish the individual doesn't help the collective, but to rehabilitate the individual does. And I noticed that like the first time I started doing work with Starhawk, it was sit down and let's talk about it. Let's talk about why you chose that action. Let's talk about what the intention was behind you saying this thing or pushing this person. And let's not punish you. Let's not put you in a space of, you did wrong, you are bad, therefore you are going to go to a bad place when you die. It's let's talk about how we can support you so that your emotions are in a place of not stableness, but agency, like being able to really stand in them and work with them rather than be moved by them and be the reacted one. And how can we support you to find the voice to ask for help, right? Because that's something else that you said, like we sit down and we say it, and we don't hurt the individual or exclude the individual for the action. We instead draw them closer and embrace them. And
I agree with that. And there's a way of doing that in community where someone still knows that they've like stepped over like in the case of someone who has like, you know, I've been present for meetings of accountability where we are faced with someone who has transgressed the line of sexual consent or body autonomy, right? And that's hard for a lot of us who are traumatized in that area, right? And so it's like, okay, so how do we sit and use our magical tools to be grounded and effective, and also like being able to go, here's the boundary, and to communicate effectively, which we're all still trying to figure out. And sometimes we can be the clearest effective communicator, but sometimes we also then need an effective listener, and then an effective container that isn't shaming anyone, but is also, so recently I just finished teaching the 6-month course with my friend Raven Stanfield, and we just did a lot of this work. And there is a difference between guilt and shame. So there's a biological. Some people are finding that there are probably biological coevolutions around guilt, and to signal to us that something wrong has happened. And so it fills the body and chemically, hormonally, and then that it goes, hey, wrong, stop. So, but then shame is often used as a tool that we put over people. But guilt is a thing that I felt, and it doesn't feel like it contracts me, but it does stop me in my tracks. And it makes me go, oh shit, okay, own that, repair that, figure that shit out, and be accountable to that. And then, you know, like, not fix it. I'm not really into fixing, but like be in the ecology of this connection. Because and that sometimes has been the motivator, but I do think shame, I talk about shame differently. I talk about shame kind of how we have been, which is like a force of dissolving agency, dissolving accountability. And it tries to like block and destroy and kind of weaken, I think it weakens things. Whereas there seems to be a biological function to the feeling of guilt. And of course we can unpack that, but I do think that there is a thing even in our biology and our chemistry and our neurology that goes, actually, that's just wrong and you should stop. And that's why we have other ways of talking about what's going on with people who don't seem to feel empathy. Like we talk about like mass murderers, and different psychologists and psychoanalysts and neurologists are trying to figure out what has happened here. Like, that this person just doesn't seem to demonstrate empathy for their victims. So that obviously, it's not just one thing, right? It's like society. It's what happened to them when they were young, probably. It's maybe there's some chemistry stuff. Maybe it has to do with religion. Maybe it has to do with their parents. Maybe it has to do with the fact that they didn't have anyone modeling any kind of boundaries or a sense of diligence when they were growing up. So there's all of these different ways that people are informed. So in some ways, I look at the different people who are voting for Trump in the US, and I go, you know what? I don't know if I would make different choices under the circumstances. Like I can say in this moment and always, I would never vote for Trump. But those people who do, like I wonder if they do because of certain social and geographical reasons. And that brings me, it doesn't make me necessarily go, oh, I'm all one, yay. But it does make me go, I have more perspective now, and I don't have to react, because I don't really like to post. I get it though, and I'm never going to say don't do that, because Trump has ordered some foul things like children's in cages at the borders, and I do, like, a lot of my Indigenous friends are and a lot of friends are rightfully angered, and because that is horrific. And so what I'm trying to do is create a space of like almost in myself, not in any other level, of focusing in, so I'm more clear as a spirit worker of what threads to pull when it comes to political magic, because I'm like, okay, so that is happening over here. Those people seem numb to their emotions. They don't know what is going on. That's really sad. Those people over there are incapacitated and they, for some reason, don't want to reach for their intelligence. Okay, those people are really angry. That makes sense. Like, and so as I'm scanning all of this, I'm like, well, okay, so as a spirit worker, how can I best navigate an expansion of growth and wonder? Because if I'm going to blast or bind, then my right hand needs to plant a seed, right? So that's also part of magical ecology. When we're trying to do a big working, we're trying to, like, if I need to clear this, you know, if I need to unbind this or clear this or take this out, then like nature, she destroys and she creates. Like that's the witch. Then I need to plant something here. So what's the vision I'm going for? You know, and so because it can't just come from one individual, I have to be paying so much attention. Yeah. And I also, in my workings, do a lot of surrender work, like conscious surrendering, before I even get to the point of doing like active work, because I need to make sure that it's coming from, I guess, what's going on, right? You know, so that I'm like, okay, so this is going on. This is the constellation and shape of the energy. And I need to make this most effective. So I need to respond to it in a way that's grounded and clear. And I can say that though, being in Australia, so I have all so I have all of this kind of emotional space for it, right? Yeah, and I really understand that.
In it.
Exactly. And I really understand that I don't have, and therefore I feel like I have maybe not more perspective at all. I probably have less, but I have a clearer emotional space. I wrote this letter the other day because a lot of people who don't live in Australia, who don't live in the US, are like, oh, fuck America, and they turn away. But America, the US, is my friend. Like, I have spent cumulatively 2 whole years in that place. Some of my best friends live there, and I have been initiated on various places. You know, I don't want to make it one big thing, but I've been initiated there, formally and by the spirit. So I can't look away, you know? So I want to add, and even though I don't think it's correct that the US is always the center of the world, I do think that it's important that I personally have a deep, intimate relationship with that place, and that I add to its liberation in some way if I can.
Yeah.
So yeah, because, you know, that it's just it looks like a mess from the outside. Astrologically speaking, this whole year is a mess.
It's true.
but it's also us, right? Like all of those planets retrograding in Capricorn that are now all direct. Like I felt that so somatically when Pluto went direct. I was like, oh yes, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, you're all direct in Capricorn. Yeah. And, you know, Capricorn is so conservative energetically and so like, laborious and into tradition, but it's also like Capricorn. What I love about Capricorn energy is it works for the long term.
And it works for excellence. It always works for what's going to be the most excellent thing. And if it, whatever's happening doesn't meet its standards, then it just says, you can go now.
Yeah.
Thank you for your application. We'll call you.
Exactly. And so in responding to that energy, that's exactly right. I want to aspire to that excellence.
Yeah. And I love the other thing that's happening right now with the Mars and the Libra, of like Mars in Aries and Sun in Libra. And we just had the new moon, and feeling that dynamic of the individual versus like the group.
The collective.
And how they're both squaring the big 3 that are hanging out in Capricorn. Right. So it's this beautiful T-square of tension where everyone's like in a pressure cooker. We're in this, and it's a lot of times when I teach magic to my students and my clients, it's we create our sacred space not to protect us from what's outside, but to contain the energy we're doing to make it that much stronger. And I think I learned that from you. But you
probably learned that from Reclaiming Witches as well.
I probably did. Yeah. I can give Caduceus and Lori a shout out. I know. they're like, we have to, like, this is the cauldron of cooking. You're cooking yourself, and you're stewing all these pieces together into this beautiful kind of witch's brew that's going to then serve. And when we're looking at squares, and especially T-squares in astrology, I'm like, the containers set. We're in that pressure cooker right now. And I think that's why everything's coming to the forefront this year, whether it is, stewardship of the land, or recognition of the peoples of the land, or how we are in a broken system, because nobody's going to save this system. Like, as someone who's in the States, a lot of friends and I are talking about how it's not going to be one man. It's not going to be one person who changes this thing. It's going to be all of us just deciding this system doesn't work anymore. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to participate. I'm going to go sit in my sovereign land. Bye.
And also, I feel like the system, like, we can, like, I think it's both true to say the system is broken and the system is working just as it was meant to.
Yeah,
but
that's
the system is ill, and the system was designed by only a few kind of people,
very Masonic people who were ready to maintain an empire, even though they were rebelling against one.
Yeah, and that's that whole thing, right? You were talking about before, the people who raped the people who raped the people. But certainly there are cultural protocols that have just been totally like swept aside because they don't serve the amassing of wealth for its own sake. Like, there are cultural protocols in so many first primary cultures, Indigenous Aboriginal cultures, that are like, no, you can't do that. You can't, like that actually transgresses a sacred law. and they're like, what sacred law? And and then twisting the Bible and the Old Testament and the New Testament to mean whatever people think it means,
which is already a twisted book, because that Council of Nicaea was like, let's leave out these 25 other stories.
Exactly. And not just that council, that was one of the biggest, but there were so many, right? And then all the bishops and the cardinals and the popes who just decided at certain times that this meant this and that this meant that, and that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. Not that that's a bad thing in and of itself, but that, because they actually just decided that one year. One year they were like, she is a prostitute. And then a few hundred years later, she isn't. Like, and that And they conflated
her, the woman at the well, versus the woman with the hair and the tears on the feet.
Yes,
it's not the same woman. And that always pisses me off. But I'm a huge fan of the Magdalene Manuscript, so there's that.
I'm a big fan of the Magdalene in general, and interestingly, this year I was meant to be teaching at California Witch Camp, and we were working with that story, and there was a lot of contention and controversy because there were some people who were like deep fans of the Magdalene Manuscript. I think I know what you're talking about. My friend Ravenna was talking about it a lot, and I was like, oh, I have never read it, and you know me, I'm really into like researching in almost a scholarly way. So I was like going back and looking, and what you said, like there's Mary of Bethany, and there's Mary who, and it was probably Mary of Bethany who did the washing hair. Of the hair, and it was probably her who was holding the spikenard in the jar. And then there's Mary of Magdalene, who was apparently some independently wealthy woman who financed their ministry. And she seemed to be the one who had 7 demons exorcised from her. But we don't fully know. But what I do know about the Magdalene as a witch is that she is a powerful constellation of consciousness. We could say spirit, we could say saint, we could say goddess. To me, it all has the same function at this point. And she is so powerful and so sovereign, and I do think she inherits the mysteries, or at least something, I don't know what to call it, of Isis, of Ishtar, of Astarte, of Asherah. I think she does inherit that, and Hathor, and that lineage, and she does magic, and she when 10 witches who are really skilled witches, in a teaching team at a Reclaiming Witch Camp, we do all this pre-work, right? When we're all getting the same fucking thing, and we're feeling, and we're feeling that palpable, like tangible force that we can point at and go, oh, that's the Magdalene, you're onto something.
Yes. I was going to make crowns for that. Ravenna was telling me, because I love making really beautiful spiky crowns. And she's like, we need Magdalene crowns. It's like, yeah, with roses. Just like big spikes and roses, because she does, she has
Exactly.
a very palpable energy. And when you start
Mm.
working with her, and it's just like
Yeah.
when you start working with the real Jesus, when you start working with
Yeah.
like the real Yeshua, the real Mother Mary,
Mm.
the real Buddha, like
Mm.
all of them, they, everybody's story has been warped and shifted and changed in some
Sure.
form or fashion by humans throughout history.
Yeah.
And right now I'm on a super Thoth Mercury Hermes Trismegistus kick.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's just like this year has been me and him in temple spaces every
Mm.
time. But I feel like even he has so many things that have been warped and changed. And now everybody's terrified when it's Mercury retrograde. And I'm like, no, this is beautiful. This is where we want to
Yeah.
be, because then we get to review, we get to go over, we get to really
Yeah.
pause and reflect and sit in this space of, why are we moving so fast? Like, where are we trying to go? What are we trying to do? Like, why are we neglecting our emails or neglecting our schedules or neglecting our cars, so that all of this strange communication stuff starts to happen and all these technological breakdowns start to happen? Like, what if we just tapped into our psychic powers instead? What if we talk to each other like from the heart instead of from our calendars? I don't know. That's
Yeah.
my,
Well, Mercury is like one of the great, as you know, gods of magic.
yeah.
And so I always think about Mercury in retrograde as, I think popular astrology has a lot to answer for, but you know, and that's coming from someone who has only been studying traditional astrology for 2 years. So I'm a complete beginner. I can now read a natal chart quite effectively, and I can read someone's transits quite effectively. But in terms of like, ooh, I don't know really how that sextile with Venus and Libra is moving over here to, you know,
Yeah.
like I can make it up, but I love to listen to the astrology podcast. I don't know if you've ever listened to them, like Chris Brennan and Austin Coppock and Kelly. I can never pronounce her last name. They're like brilliant. Every month do these 2 to 3 hour forecasts. They're all traditional astrologers, you know, and I appreciate tradition so much, but because I was born with Uranus and Saturn conjunct by the degree in Sagittarius in my 11th house, and so what that, later when I realized what that meant, I was like, oh, that describes me to a T, because I am always working in groups and networks through friends, and like working in movements.
Yeah.
And I cherish absolutely, like with the Sagittarian zeal, tradition, but it's completely working with Uranus, who abolishes bullshit. So, you know,
Yes.
so I'm like, oh, but that's bullshit, and that's bullshit, and that's bullshit, and that's just cultural crap that is oppressive, and no one needs it. So I'll take that out, and I'll take that out, and then what we have, at least in my life, I still love tradition, and I consider myself a traditionalist. But I think people don't know what that means anymore. And so one of my missions in life has been to teach folkloric and traditional witchcraft, and to give the law in a way that still cherishes the boundaries of my oaths, because the law is there. It's in fairy tales, it's in our lives, it's in astrology. Like astrological lore is such a treasure trove. It's in how we communicate and how we listen. It's in literature. It's in how we are taught certain things that no one unpacks, or that very few, that the more accurate statement would be very few unpack, like the threefold law.
Yes.
And cursing, because some people just don't want to look at it. They're like, oh, that's too hard, it's too scary. And I'm like, but you're calling yourself a witch. Like, the word witch invokes holy dread.
Yeah.
It invokes something very powerful and volatile and beautiful and wild. And if you're going to call yourself that, then you kind of need to deal with its history,
Yeah.
right? And we can't just like whitewash it and pretend certain things. We have to go, no, this, and this is a part of its history. You don't have to practice those threads, but they are there. And we need to respect it, because also, let us not forget that like 100,000 people, that's the current scholarly estimate, were executed for the crime. And that's still a lot of people in context. And also, that's not taking into consideration a lot of the people who were accused and let go.
Right.
Because actually there were a lot of people who were accused and let go. And there were a lot of people who were hanged and burnt and lynched. There was also lynching.
Yeah, where they didn't even get a trial. A mob
Yeah.
just came and took him.
Yeah.
I love that
And
you're
this
saying.
fear of like women's magic, and this fear of the sphere of people who are touched by the other world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. I love the way that you're saying that, because so many times nowadays, witch has become a popular word with millennials of like, oh yeah, I'm a witch, I'm into witchcraft. And it's like this cool thing because it's mysterious, and yet they don't want to own the responsibility of what that actually means. And I'm kind of glad that I encountered the world of Wicca as a very small child. And at the same time, I was teaching myself how to write hieroglyphs and reading the Greek and Roman myths. I was in it. Because
you were doing it. Yeah.
I was born one. And,
yes, of course.
And I remember telling my parents when I was 12, like, I'm going to be a witch. And they just, the pastor was called. Everybody was praying over me. It was really sweet. They tried so hard. I got baptized twice.
Oh my.
So I'm taking care of on that end. But I'm glad that I was embracing the word as a way of identifying before it became trendy, because I feel like if I hadn't, I never would have stepped onto the path, because I just don't like doing what trendy people do. And now watching it, I'm like, do you realize what you're messing with? Like, do you realize the fabric of the world is what a witch works with? It's like not just doing crystals out under the moonlight and like pulling some tarot cards and scratching around on a Ouija board. It's literally sitting and stepping between the worlds, standing with is, was, and shall be, pulling on those threads and cutting a few of them. And like, that's huge responsibility. And there was one ceremony I was leading recently, and one of the girls came out and she was like, I was there and I was watching and I saw these things and I felt like playing with them. So I started to play with them, and I was going ping, ping, ping with my finger, and they were flying off, and the gods were like, it's okay that you're doing that, but just realize the consequences of those galaxies flying off that way. And she was like, and she like tried to bring them and put them back where they were. Like during the ceremony, it's like, that's the magnitude, that's the scale of what witches are working on. And we don't realize it because we're in these human bodies, and we forget that when you do reach out and you see, like, I love that you could describe it as a constellation. When you see that and you take one of the threads and you tug on it, it will affect the way that the entire tapestry is moving. And
absolutely, yeah.
When people are stepping into this, say this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, which if it is, go back and listen to all the other ones. But if this is the first time you're listening to it and you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to be a witch because of the darkness, that's one of the biggest components to me, is being able to recognize our capacity to work all magic. We have the capacity to work on all the ends, and so many people don't want to admit that, and then they're limiting their own power, and that power gets untamed, and then it starts to lash out in other ways.
Absolutely. I also think we need to, as the so-called West, especially the so-called techno-industrialist West, as my friend Preston would say, like this idea, exactly, Preston, this idea of like darkness being equated with bad, evil, negative. It's like, actually, physics teaches us that most things are darkness. Like that light is a very rare and very miraculous thing. Actually, like the more people look at that, they're like, what the fuck, how does that even happen? But light is very rare and darkness is most. And a lot of in Anderson Fairy, we have this cosmology of God herself, the star goddess, right? And we say that, before the beginning, she is all things, and she is lonely and alone, walking and through herself. And she kind of doesn't even know she's there, until
and she wants to witness it.
And then she witnesses it, exactly. And not just witnesses it, but she, in her witnessing of it, it delves into holy lust. And she fucks herself. I love that I work in a tradition where our creation story is this goddess who fucks herself. And in that primordial orgasm, all worlds are realized. All spirits are formed. Exactly. And so that we praise the darkness of the womb, the darkness of the tomb, like the darkness of the earth, the you know, and that helps, that, you know, that is beautiful. Like Victor Anderson said, white magic is poetry and black magic is anything that works. And what he was what he was doing was he was trying to destroy, you know, duality in that moment. He was like, oh, all these people think white and black are opposites. That's ridiculous. Like he's actually talking about color magic, white magic. Like what he's saying is white is the moon. Like he was a priestess of the muse, a priest of the muse. Like he would work directly with the moon goddess to channel and write poetry. That was one of the biggest things he did. And then many of his students, he would read his poetry or ask them to read it, and he would like, tell me exactly what it means, in his way, as a Gemini. And
yes.
And then we also have this black magic, which is more than that, which is behind that, which is because the moon comes out of the darkness, and the moon goes back to the darkness, just like the sun, just like us all. And so I like to remind people of that when they start to use that language. I'm like, oh, I'm like, cool, yeah, it is terrifying. The darkness is terrifying because we have been trained to think that way. And I guess on a primordial human mammal primate level as well, darkness is scary to us because we can't see. And we used to, and we still do, but we used to make fires and campfires together. And then witches would be the ones. One of my favorite descriptions of a witch is that all the humans are gathering together and they're cooking, they're telling stories, all the beautiful things that indigenous intact cultures do. But witches are the ones who go beyond, they literally walk beyond the casting of the flame into what lies behind it. And there we deal with the gods before the gods, and then we come back and we tell the tribe what they said.
Yeah, we had to get away from light pollution even back then.
Yeah. And we're like, hey, by the way, the ancestors say this, this, and this. and not everyone wants to hear what the ancestors have to say.
Oh, yeah. I always jokingly refer to the musical Into the Woods when it comes to witches. And when the witch is flipping out at the end and she's just pissed off at them and she's like, you're so nice. You're not good. You're not bad. You're just nice. I'm not good. I'm not nice. I'm just right. I'm the witch. You're the world. And she just she goes into this thing of like, I am sick of this. I am sick of these people. Take the magic beans. You can have them all. Do what you want with it, because I'm not going to deal with the fact that you want to just be nice. You don't want to be authentic. You don't want to be true. You don't want to be yourself. You don't want to be in connection to the land. You want to contain it. You want to make it obey you. You want it all in orderly rows and have it be nice. And she's like, no, I'm the witch. I'm wild. And rewilding. Oh, that feels so good, the thought of it.
The word nice actually used to mean boring.
Yeah.
Like that's how it used to be used. So that's really interesting. So, sometimes I also have always thought that word is ridiculous. Like when someone goes, oh, that's nice. And we say it, I think we still subconsciously remember what it used to mean in English because that's what it meant. And people are like, oh, that's nice. And I'm like, yeah, boring as fuck. Like... It's not a word that I use like consciously to mean anything good.
No. Well, it's like in the American South when they say bless her heart.
Yeah, exactly.
Bless his heart. And you're like, no, you're just saying that they're an idiot.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, we are almost at time. Is there anything else that you would like to share or say or close out with?
Yeah, I would like to maybe speak to those people who are finding the word witch and finding that it means something powerful to you. Because, I too, like when I was 11 and 12, that's when I woke up to the word, and that's when I realized what I was. And I could only access what I could access, right?
Yeah.
And what I quickly luckily found in the library of the city or town, depending on how you look at it, that I lived in, I found some of the more traditional books, and that was a boon to me. But they also those traditional teachers from the 50s and the 60s, they were also saying, go do it, go practice it, go into nature and go try and test these techniques in a way that you feel like you can right now, and go have experiences, because essentially witchcraft is like a practical, mystical, ecstatic encountering tradition. Like, it's not like sit in this chair or lay down and read. Like, that's great. But then go walk out the door, go to the creek, the river, the crossroads, go out under the cloak of the stars and do something really witchy. Like, go do something witchy that is traditionally folklorically witchy, because then you'll touch the current of witchcraft if you're lucky.
Yes.
Like, I encourage you, go out to the crossroads at midnight and bring honey and milk and say nothing and pour it out and just wish it, you know, to the good people and wish it to the people in the earth, and then turn and don't look back and walk home. Like, go do something that will make you feel like a witch, and then you'll start to step into it. Like, it's fine if you want to work with crystals under the moon. We wouldn't say that's traditionally witchcraft, but we would say some witches definitely do that. There's, of course, a lot of stone lore and gem lore. But again, it's like there are certain things that maybe are going to evoke the current a little more easy. Like, if you go walking in the bush and you're twisting a red thread around your fingers and you're thinking about how that can help you feel the fibers of fate or the strands of weird. Or, you know, you might be like at home at night and you might take all your clothes off and take a kitchen knife and cast it around you and feel how you just cut yourself out of the fabric and put yourself between the worlds. Like, you know, there are certain things that we can do to evoke the current of witchcraft that is behind traditions, that is behind covens. And if that scares you, that's great. And push through it, right? Like,
yes.
that holy dread, that's the stuff we're looking for, because it destroys expectation, and it also challenges our preconceived notions, and it challenges what we have internalized about darkness, about women's power, about animal flesh, about sexuality, about eros, because these are the things that witchcraft exalts.
Yes.
You know, witchcraft exalts the woman's body and all bodies, but certainly we have this thing about exalting women, and people assigned female at birth, and we exalt the blood, and we exalt the death, and we exalt the birth, and we are standing witnessing all of those rites. And so that's what I would say. Like, you can read whatever book is there, and you can look at the TikTok videos, and some of them are really cute and fun. And I know 90% of you will like leave it behind, and it was a fun thing for you. And just, I would like you all to remember and respect that there are a bunch of people out there, and this is our lives. You know, these are our traditions, and these are our lives, and we commit ourselves fully to it, to training in it. And that looks different on different people, but I maybe would want that respect.
Yeah, it's a title. It's a title to honor, and if you fall in love with it, if you fall in love with climbing over the golf course fence to get to the beautiful wild tumbleweeds in between, that is untouched land that doesn't have extra sprinklers watering it, where you might run into a bobcat or a rattlesnake. And because I've done this, you place some sacred tools down on the ground, and you wait for the moon to rise, and when it does, then you howl and you scream and you dance, and you feel the boundaries of the wild, and you work with them as opposed to push them away. And if you fall in love with that, then come talk to one of us. Come talk to Fia or to me, and explore it, because you've turned something on, and it's ready and it's waiting. And the more of us who get to engage with that, the more that we get to have a community that understands and is supportive and is accepting and willing to walk with you during those kind of in between the fates, in between the worlds, in between the lines, crossroads spaces, and we can all meet there.
Exactly. I love that you said if you fall in love with a word, and you said you've turned something on, because there are so many ways to read that. Because like, I do think that we turn on the multiverse, like, and it turns us on, because so much witchcraft magic happens through eros and intimacy. And also sometimes the word falls in love with us. Sometimes the witch is hunting us, and then we just turn around and we go, okay, witch, take me. Like,
I just saw like Baba Yaga flying.
Exactly. The ancient primordial witch, like the story of witchcraft, she sometimes wants us back.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, my child, you are of me and you forgot. Please come home.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's how it feels. Sometimes the word hunts us. Sometimes the word falls in love with us.
Oh, I love that. I think that's a perfect way to end. Thank you so much, Theo.
Thank you. It's been lovely to reconnect.
Yes. We'll see all of the things soon, but yeah, just I'll keep listening to your podcast and
Yeah, I'm
we'll move
excited
from
to
there.
listen to yours.
Okay.
You should come onto ours.
Yes, I would love
Yeah,
to.
that would be amazing.
Okay, perfect.